So that clip is taken really from the heyday of network television. Um, Cable was just barely beginning to raise its ugly, wiry head, and the networks dominated. And the only thing that mattered for the networks, which are ad supported, is how many people watched their shows. Ratings, ratings, ratings. Ratings equal money equals bliss, as Greta Thunberg said. Why do you people only talk about money? So I wanted to start after talking about a little bit about how things are in flux. I wanted to start with kind of the key part of television before things got in flux, and it was all about ratings. So TV, and here are some of those big devices. There's an older one on the right, a newer one on the left, and of course there's another one. Oops, right there. So another television watching device, right? Or is it a video watching device, or what? And in addition to device fluxness, there is, of course, programming fluxness with the whole model of ad-supported television making way for these new blockbuster subscription services that are setting new standards for quality in TV programming and showing people new ways to watch TV programs. In fact, the latest Emmy Awards, I believe that there were something like 7 total winners from all the network television shows. Everything was won by subscription services, whether it was HBO or whatever. So, what does that tell you, folks? We already did this. Sorry. Let's talk a little bit about further defining television and getting into the technology a little bit. You know I love to do that. This is absolutely a horrible slide for a presentation, but I apologize. But the technology originally was sent on radio waves, a certain spectrum of radio waves. And now, of course, we can also, the television device in your living room anyway, can accept signals from a VCR or DVD player. And cable TV did what it's did, and that's a hard wired connect. Satellite dishes are a way to get cable TV, to get the signal right from the satellite, and then it's wired to your house. So there were 3 bands of the radio spectrum frequency devoted to TV channels, and you can see those right there. This gets back to the wireless. So for those of you who are interested in the science of it, spend a little more time looking at this complicated chart, for which I apologize. Now, who invented TV? You know, I'm very interested in technology and who did what. And we talked a lot about Marconi and Tesla with radio. And actually, there was a fellow whose last name was Farnsworth who is credited with inventing the ability to send a video and audio signal on the radio spectrum, and then to have those signals be picked up by a device called a TV. And he showed his, this was in the 20s, he was showing that television could work. And he is given credit for being one of the most important people of the century. I think he had a farming background. I think, in fact, he was born on a farm in the Midwest. And we've talked about the radio spectrum, but this is it. Electromagnetic spectrum ranging from 1 hertz to 3,000 gigahertz. And the electromagnetic waves in this frequency range, called radio waves, are used in all kinds of modern technology: radio, television, mobile phones, etc. Here's a little more information. I think we've looked at this one already. And boy, here's another beaut of a chart. I think what you take away from this is, if you want to look at it in detail, this really displays from 1 hertz to 3,000 gigahertz, everything that's loaded into the radio spectrum, because certain wavelengths are allocated for different uses. Here's another one that breaks down one of those sections into different kinds of things. Here you can see some of the mobile frequencies, and then on the top you can see the actual megahertzes or whatever that are listed there for it. So let's just do an overview of television, kind of. 71.1 billion in ad spending. This is a few years ago. It's been going up. Cable is 22.4 billion of that and growing. The networks are not growing so much. Spot TV, like spot radio, is when you buy television, when you buy a local station and just broadcast your message in that local area. That's spot TV. And by the way, spot TV is what gets most of the political spending. Because, as we all know, with our electoral college, candidates tend to focus on what they call swing states and spend their political dollars there, and they buy local stations, so the local stations really have a field day. And of course, as we all know, because of the flux, we've got all these new players in the video/television space. And TV is bleeding into the internet in other ways, in that each network and channel has its own website. And content is moving across devices. By the way, what used to be called the Cable Advertising Bureau has been renamed the Video Advertising Bureau. So, an online video is 57.5 billion. It's not included in the TV ad spending. TV ad spending and online video spending are two different animals. And we didn't talk about, TiVo, the ability to record and skip ads, okay. DVR is the same thing, binge watching, so there's a number of these things putting television in flux. It is the most powerful and persuasive medium in history, without a doubt. TV advertising is the most effective type of advertising. In terms of an impression, it has it all. It has sight, sound, motion. Doesn't always have a lot of depth of sale, unless it's an infomercial, but anyway. And there we go. Now, to go back a little bit to the history, this is the family around the radio, and this happened starting in the 20s and the 30s, but after World War II, that radio was replaced by a black and white television set, which received a signal. People had antennas on their roofs with wires going down to the TV in their home. And before the days of cable. And we talked about this before, but it bears repeating that basically radio, just as you saw that the one device replaced the other, many things kind of flipped over from radio right into TV. The same companies ran the networks. CBS, NBC were two of the major television networks. The content, the shows, just flipped over. So a radio show, the Jack Benny show, the George Burns show on radio, they would just have the star do a TV show, a 30-minute TV show, and cast it and film it, and that's what that was. The concept of the network that William Paley started, where the network, CBS network, provided their programming to all these affiliate stations all over the country, so that the program aired at the same time all over the country. And the stations paid for the quote-unquote programming by allowing the network to sell national advertisers. And so the local station allowed time in the broadcast where they would run national commercials. It began in 1939, the 1939 World's Fair, Franklin Roosevelt, on NBC's experimental local station. And in 1941, NBC and CBS came on the air with a commercial station again in New York City. So that's that's the beginning of World War II. Right after World War II, only 6 stations were on the air, but NBC and CBS began to expand. And by 1948, 2 years later, there were 4 TV networks, including Dumont. Has anybody heard of the Dumont network? Not me. 128 stations in cities all over the country, began a full primetime schedule 7 days a week. And I think we talked about Uncle Milty. It was pretty amazing. Milton Berle was his stage name, real name Mendel Berlinger. He was almost single-handedly responsible for selling television sets. He had the Texaco Star Theater from 1948 to 1956, and basically it was a vaudeville show on TV. I don't know how many of you have heard of vaudeville, or what vaudeville is, but it's really, I don't know what would be similar today. It's just a variety of acts. I mean, when the Ed Sullivan Show, when the Beatles appeared, I want to say 65, 64, 65. I know, I watched it. Was essentially a vaudeville show on television. But vaudeville shows were just a bunch of different kind of unrelated acts, a singer, a comedy act, dancers, different things people would go to. They didn't have television and they wanted to go out and get entertained. It wasn't a whole consistent show or a musical. It was just a variety of different things. And that's kind of what Milton Berle did on television. And I believe we saw, and I'm not going to show it again, that clip where he's in drag as the June Bride. Pretty funny. And you see it's called the Texaco Star Theater because there was only one advertiser. So they used the sponsorship model in a lot of the early TV, where only one company sponsored the whole show. Well, and so TVs, by the way, 191,000, then 21 million by 1956, and then in the 60s we saw color TV, and the penetration of televisions in American households and color televisions was huge. I mean, in the 90%. And that was all being broadcast on radio waves. And the antenna on top of the house that poor old Dad had to, climb up a ladder and then fall off and break his sacroiliac every once in a while trying to adjust the antenna. And then cable kind of sprang out of the gate in the late 70s. It really started rolling. But this is a whole kind of little visualization history of cable. And you start in the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. You can see that gray line going through there. And this shows some of the major developments as cable took over, and very few people now have televisions that get signals over radio waves. Pretty much everybody's getting some kind of signal from through their cable, and also getting their internet through their cable, by the way, and their phone through the cable. So these local cable companies, they're called MSOs, handle the wiring into everyone's home and provide us every kind of information service on these cables, because they're able to have such wonderful reproduction, and they can send lots of information. The cable revolution, the first really big flexor in the flux of television. And this shows HDTV, which is the new technology now, and this is worldwide.